wanted to share with you a little bit about my thoughts on the methodological challenges of studying history of Tibet. So, as Professor Sanjay Subramaniam of UCLA has said, to study about Indian history, you need to go outside of India. So, it's very well known that the Tibetans and High Lamas, scholars, politicians, etc., were forced into exile by the Chinese government slash invading forces throughout the 20th century, from various different political backgrounds. It wasn't just the communists, but also the Kuomintang, which is now located in Taiwan today. As it has been documented, the search for the reincarnation of Drikyum Chetsang Rinpoche was very much a tumultuous process due to the civil war between the communists and the Kuomintang. But fortunately for the Drikyum Kagyu lineage, they found Rinpoche, and he went on to go into exile in Tibet through walking through Nepal. And reading his story has been really inspirational for me to do this video today. And he has established a Tibetan history written in Tibetan, as well as a Sonzan Kampo library named after their former Tibetan king. And this goes to show the amount of determination in the 20th and 21st century to address these methodological issues, because it's not just a sacred and secular dichotomy, but also the issue of survival for Tibetans in different countries that have their own national time or understanding of the 20th century, understanding of modernity. So an order or Sangha in Indonesia would have a very different understanding of Tibetans' experiences and how they interact with them, as opposed to somebody in France. By the way, both countries have hosted many different Tibetan rituals and Tok offerings. So it is not a new challenge, it is just something that has come to light for me. There is the issue of reincarnation, right? So we have the hagiographical style of history where we study High Lamas through their time, which is reincarnation time. And now, since they've been exiled from their homeland, we study them through secular time, which is more dominated through political turmoils, civilizational developments such as the script, and construction of architecture like temples or mosques, etc. I once found this book, Islam in Tibet, when I was traveling in Cairo. I was so surprised it was there. But as you know, like, scholars of the Western academia, which has been dominant throughout the world, are more interested in the secular time. And so my interest is in both. As a historian, I'm interested in the secular time. As a Vajrayana practitioner, I'm interested in reincarnate stories. Today we will compare and combine two secular timelines provided by Dr. Bob Thurman and Dr. Andrew Quitman. So, in 1062, Atisha founds Radrang Monastery. From the 1200s to 1300s, Mongol forces ruled Tibet with the help of the Sakya family until the Mongols decline, and then an indigenous Tibetan dynasty called Pagmodru becomes the ruling state. 1357, Lama Jetsun Kapa is born, seen as a reincarnation of Manjushri. 1409, he establishes the Monlan Chenmo, the Great Prayer Festival, in Lhasa. 1474, Gendun Drukpa reincarnates after establishing Jasilumpa Monastery. 1475, Gendun Gyatso is born as a son of a yogin and yogini. 1543, third Dalai Lama, His Holiness, is born as Sonam Gyatso. 1617, fifth Dalai Lama is born. He demilitarizes the Mongols. Uh, in 1642, the fifth Dalai Lama accepts responsibility as king. He rebuilds Potala on the Red Mountain and establishes it as a fortress for Mandala practice. 1652, the fifth Dalai Lama enters an agreement with the Manchu Emperor Shunzhi to form an alliance. And his timeline probably goes on, but we'll end here for now because the next timeline uh, covers the future. Now we move on to the timeline organized by Dr. Andrew Quitman in his book on the Saint Milarepa. The late 15th century was a defining moment for Milarepa's life, even though he had been dead for almost 4 centuries. It was a period of both civil unrest and religious expansion in central Tibet. As the Yuan imperial court, the Mongols, declined and eventually fell in 1368, political influence likewise began to wane within the Tibetan Sakya institution that had effectively ruled Tibet since the Mongol installation of Sakya Pandita in 1249. Sakya Pandita was born in 1182 and passed on in 1251. This coincided with the ascent to power of Changchuk Gyaltsen between 1350 and 1354, beginning a century of political rule under the influential Fakmodro hegemony. This was the indigenous power mentioned in the previous timeline. However, that period of relative calm would be shattered in the last quarter of the 15th century when war broke out between the far western kingdom and the central Tibetan region in 1472. Instability increased with the rise in 1477 of the Rinpoche family in the western Tibetan province of Tsang. Patrons of the Kagyu Karmapa hierarchs, they waged a bitter civil war against the predominantly Gelug supporters of U province and Lhasa in central Tibet. In the midst of partisan attacks and retaliatory clashes, one Rinpoche prince, Donyo Dorje, was an influential patron for the author who would recast the figure of Milarepa for centuries to come, Tsangnyong Heruka. Tsangnyong Heruka's world was an age of fervent religious reform and doctrinal systemization. During the 14th century, great Tibetan intellectuals such as Trempa, born in 1308 and passed on in 1364, began to synthesize new systems of Buddhist literature and practice. The decades leading up to Tsangnyong Heruka's birth were marked by the activities of renowned individuals such as the Sakya scholars Rongten Mawe Senge, who established the famed central Tibetan monastery of Nalanda, and his disciples Sonam Senge and Shakya Chokden. This was also the time of Tsongkhapa, the brilliant scholar who regrounded teachings of the earlier Kadam sect within a system of strict monasticism and rigorous philosophical study. Together with his disciples, he established Lhasa's 3 great seats of monastic learning, Ganden in 1409, Drepung in 1416, and Sera in 1419, that would serve as a platform for the nascent Gelugpa tradition they inspired. This activity, referred to in academic literature as a Tibetan Reformation or Renaissance, Tsangnyong Heruka promoted his own vision of religious reform as part of a tradition of unconventional figures known as Nyongpa or religious madmen. As the antithesis of the scholar monk, the mad yogins were not unlike Indian tantric adepts of the Siddha tradition, adopting lives of transgressive and weird behavior. For the faithful, their outrageous behavior signaled their yogic realization and lack of attachment to society's trappings. It was a movement, however symbolic, away from the rising tide of corporate religion back to the solitary itinerant yogin, an ideal upon which the Kagyu tradition was founded and an image embodied in the figure of So that concludes the 2 timelines and some thoughts on Tibetan history and the challenges we face, aside from the obvious political barrier of the People's Republic of China, as well as historical claims by the Kuomintang. I'm sure if they were in power, they would still have the same issue, but that's for another episode. Take care, stay safe, and happy holidays.